The candles burned like accusations. Sarah sat alone at the long ceremonial table, her black silk dress a funeral shroud among the jewel-toned gowns surrounding her. Gold threads woven through her braided hair caught the flickering light, the only brightness permitted to someone like her. The empty plate before her gleamed like polished bone, reflecting nothing but the vacancy where a mate should have been. The whispers started before she had even taken her seat. "She shouldn't be here." Rejected Omegas cursed the ceremony. "I heard Beta Rovan was right to cast her out." The voices sliced through the air, sharp as claws dragging across stone. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the empty plate, counting the gold-painted vines that spiraled across its rim. 37, 38, 39. Anything to avoid looking up, to avoid seeing the faces that went with those cruel whispers. The grand hall of Moonfell stretched vast and merciless around her. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, hammered gold catching the light of 1,000 candles suspended on iron chandeliers. Tapestries bearing pack sigils lined the walls, each one a declaration of power, bloodline, and loyalty. The air thrummed with the scent of wolves, perfume, and something sharper underneath it all. Anticipation, judgment, fear. At the high table where the council sat, draped in ceremonial furs and silver chains, she could feel their eyes on her, watching, waiting to see if she would break protocol, give them a reason to have her removed. She would not give them the satisfaction. The drums began, deep, resonant, the heartbeat of the ceremony itself. The sound rolled through the hall like thunder, and 300 wolves rose as one, mates finding mates, hands reaching across tables, eyes meeting in the ancient language of the bond. Gold light seemed to shimmer between paired wolves, threads of magic made visible by intention and ritual. Sarah remained seated. There was no one to rise for. She felt the weight of her isolation like a physical thing pressing down on her shoulders. Around her, chairs scraped against marble, silk rustled. Soft laughter bubbled up from couples reuniting after the formal separation required before the Luna pairing. The hall swelled with warmth, with connection, with everything she no longer had. The rejection slash on her shoulder throbbed beneath the black silk. 3 months old and it still burned like a fresh brand. A scar that refused to heal. A mark that screamed unwanted louder than any words ever could. Then the room cracked open. 2 massive hands slammed onto the table before her with a sound like a judge's gavel striking stone. Silverware jumped, wine sloshed in goblets. The drums stuttered and went silent. Every wolf in the hall froze. Sarah's head snapped up. Chainmail glinted like dragon scales in the candlelight. A cloak the color of dying suns fell in heavy folds behind shoulders broad enough to block out the world. Long brown hair framed a face carved from winter itself, all sharp angles and brutal beauty. Dark eyes burned into hers, with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. Alpha King Darius Varen leaned down until his face was inches from hers, close enough that she could see the tension coiled in his jaw, the way his pupils had blown wide in something that looked almost like fear. "Stand." His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The command cut through the silence like a blade through silk, absolute and undeniable. Sarah's heart detonated in her chest. "Act like you're with me." The hall erupted. Gasps tore through the crowd like a wave breaking against cliffs. Chairs scraped. Nobles lunged to their feet. Someone dropped a goblet and wine spread across marble like spilled blood. The whispers that had circled Sarah moments before exploded into outright chaos. The king never chooses. He never touches anyone. A rejected Omega? Impossible. This breaks every protocol. Sarah could not breathe, could not think. The king never took a Luna. In 3 years on the throne, Darius Varen had refused every match the council proposed, attended every ceremony alone, made it clear through silence and distance that he would not be claimed. And now he stood before her, this creature of rumor and ruthlessness, demanding she pretend to be his. "I can't." The words fell from her lips in a broken whisper. "I don't understand." His hand closed around her wrist, not gently, not cruelly, but with the inevitability of a door slamming shut, of a choice being ripped away before it was ever truly offered. "If you want to live through tonight, get up." The words were soft, meant only for her, but they detonated something cold and sharp in her chest because this was not a rescue, this was not kindness, This was survival wearing the mask of salvation. Sarah's legs moved before her mind caught up. She rose on trembling limbs, her hands still locked in his iron grip. The black silk of her dress whispered against marble as she stood, and for one suspended moment the entire hall held its breath. Then Darius turned, pulling her with him, and began walking toward the center of the sacred circle. The crowd parted like water before a ship's prow, faces blurred past her, some shocked, some furious, some calculating in a way that made her skin crawl. At the high table, the council members had risen, hands gripping the edges of their seats, mouths open in protest that had not yet found words. Sarah's mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. The king never danced. The king never chose. The king certainly never acknowledged the rejected, the shamed, the wolves who had failed the most basic test of their nature. And yet his hand remained locked around her wrist, steady as stone, as he led her into the heart of the ceremony. The sacred circle was marked by candles arranged in a perfect ring, their flames bending inward as if drawn by invisible wind. This was where bonds were sealed, where mates declared their intention before the moon and the packs, where magic hummed so close to the surface that even humans would have felt it prickling against their skin. Darius stopped at the circle's edge and turned to face her. In the candlelight, his face was all shadows and sharp edges, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. His grip on her wrist loosened but did not release. "Breathe," he said, voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "And whatever happens next, do not let go." Sarah realized with crystalline clarity that she was not being saved. She was being weaponized. But if she was going to be used, she thought as his fingers tightened once more, and he stepped into the circle, pulling her with him, she would make sure she chose the target. The hall erupted behind them in a symphony of outrage and disbelief, and Sarah stepped forward into the light. 3 months earlier, Sarah had believed in fate. She remembered standing in this same hall, but the memory felt like it belonged to someone else, a different girl in a different life. That girl had worn pale blue silk, the color of dawn. That girl had smiled when Beta Rovan of Ashridge Pack took her hand and led her through the crowd, his touch warm and steady against her palm. That girl had not yet learned what it meant to be broken. The mate bond had sparked between them during the summer hunt, a sensation like lightning striking through water. Sarah had been gathering medicinal herbs near the northern border when she caught his scent on the wind. Pine and iron, and something deeper, something that called to the wolf inside her with a recognition that bypassed thought entirely. When he stepped through the trees, tall and golden-haired, with eyes the color of amber, her heart had known before her mind caught up. Mine. The word had risen unbidden, primal, absolute. And when his eyes found hers, she saw the same recognition reflected back, the same certainty. Rovan had courted her properly after that, brought her flowers from the high meadows, walked with her through Moonfell's market squares, his hand resting at the small of her back in a gesture of claiming that made her feel safe. Protected, chosen. Her family had celebrated. Her mother wept with joy. Her father clasped Rovan's shoulder and spoke of grandchildren, of the strength their union would bring to Ashridge's trade agreements with the capital. Sarah had let herself believe it was real. The Luna ceremony that year was meant to be their official bonding. The priesthood required all new matches to undergo the sacred test, a ritual that confirmed spiritual compatibility and ensured the bond was blessed by the moon itself. It was a formality. Everyone said so. The spark had already happened. The test would simply make it official. Sarah remembered walking into the temple chamber, hand in hand with Rovan, both of them dressed in ceremonial white. The high priestess from House Thorn waited beside the altar, her silver robes catching the light of ceremonial candles. She was beautiful in the way ice was beautiful, sharp, cold, perfect. The priestess had placed their joined hands over a basin of moon-blessed water and begun the chant. That was when everything shattered. Sarah had felt it first as a wrongness in her chest, a pulling sensation, as if something inside her was being stretched too thin. The water in the basin began to ripple, then churn, then go completely still, smooth as glass, dark as a void. The priestess's face had gone bone white. Rovan jerked his hand away as if she had burned him. "What is this?" His voice cracked with something Sarah could not name. Disgust, fear, rage. "What did you do?" "I did nothing." Sarah's words came out strangled. "I do not understand." The priestess stepped back, her silver robes whispering against stone. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the chamber. To the witnesses who had come to celebrate. To the council members who attended all sacred tests. "The bond is corrupted, she is null howl." Sarah did not know what that meant, but she heard the gasps. Saw the horror ripple through the crowd like a wave. Felt Rovin's hand slip entirely from hers, leaving her cold and untethered. "I reject this bond." Rovin's voice rang clear and brutal in the sudden silence. "She is Omega, soft and spirit, broken. I will not tie my line to weakness." The rejection was immediate, formal, irreversible. Before Sarah could speak, could beg for explanation, could ask what she had done wrong, 2 temple attendants grabbed her arms. They dragged her to the altar. Held her down while the priestess heated an iron brand in the ceremonial flames. The pack tattoo on her shoulder was elegant script, black ink declaring her Ashridge bloodbound. The priestess pressed the brand across it in a single diagonal slash, and Sarah's scream tore through the temple like a wounded animal, the smell of burning flesh, the sound of her own voice breaking. The sight of Rovin turning away, his jaw set, his eyes empty of everything they had once held. By sunrise, her family stopped answering her letters. By noon, the pack house sent a messenger with her belongings and a terse note. Ashridge Pack no longer claimed her. She was to remove herself from their territory within 3 days. By the next moon, she had learned what null howl meant. It meant she was dangerous, broken in a way that could not be fixed. Her presence weakened mate bonds within arm's reach, disrupted the sacred magic that held wolf society together. She was not just rejected, she was poison. Dracaroon was a kingdom built on 3 pillars: bloodlines, bonds, and brutality. Power flowed through mate connections. Alliances were sealed by pairing strong wolves together. Trade routes, military positions, council seats, all of it depended on the intricate web of bonds that tied packs to each other and to the throne. Omegas were considered soft by nature, gentle, nurturing, necessary for bearing strong pups, but not for holding power. A rejected Omega was worse than useless. It was a warning, a sign that something fundamental had failed. Sarah had moved to the edges of Moonfell, taking a room in a boarding house that asked no questions. She worked in a textile shop, keeping her head down, speaking to no one. The rejection slash on her shoulder marked her wherever she went. Other wolves gave her a wide berth. Mothers pulled their children away when she passed. Shop owners watched her with suspicious eyes, as if brokenness might be contagious. But the law was absolute. Every wolf of pairing age was required to attend the annual lunar ceremony. Refusal meant exile from Dracaroon entirely. Sarah had nowhere else to go. No pack would take her. No territory would shelter a null howl. So she came, wore black because it felt honest. Sat at the table reserved for the unmated and unwanted, and prepared to endure. What she had not prepared for was Alpha King Darius Varen. The rumors about the king were legend. He had been crowned 3 years ago after the famine conflict, a brutal war that nearly tore Dracaroon apart. 3 rival Alpha lines had tried to seize the throne during the chaos. Darius had been a general then, commanding the border legions. He ended the war in a single winter by breaking all 3 challengers through strategy so ruthless that wolves still whispered about it in taverns. They said he never smiled, never showed mercy, never took counsel from anyone. They said he ruled through fear and competence in equal measure. They also said he never took a Luna. Every year the council pressured him. Every year he attended the ceremony alone, sat at the high table with an empty chair beside him, and left without choosing anyone. The council grew more insistent each season. Rumors swirled that if he did not secure the throne through marriage before spring, they would call a vote, force him to abdicate in favor of someone more willing to play by the old rules. Darius had ignored them all. Until tonight. Until he walked through the crowd and chose her. Sarah's mind spun as she stood in the sacred circle, Darius's hand still locked around her wrist. The candles bent inward, flames flickering as if caught in invisible wind. The crowd pressed close around them, a living wall of shock and fury and calculation. She was not naive enough to believe this was kindness. The king did not make impulsive choices. He did not act without reason. which meant he had pulled her into the spotlight for a purpose she could not yet see. And the cold certainty settling into her bones told her that whatever game he had just dropped her into, survival was far from guaranteed. Darius led Sarah out of the sacred circle with the same iron grip he had used to pull her in. The crowd parted reluctantly, wolves pressing back just far enough to let them pass but staying close enough to watch every movement. Whispers followed them like ghosts. Sarah kept her eyes forward, her spine straight, trying to remember how to breathe. The high table loomed ahead, elevated on a marble platform that overlooked the entire hall. It was reserved for the council, the king, and whatever honored guests or mates they chose to acknowledge. Sarah had never imagined sitting there, had never dreamed of being anywhere near that seat of power. Darius pulled out the chair beside his own and released her wrist. The absence of his touch left her skin cold. Sit. It was not a request. Sarah sat. The council members already seated at the table stared at her with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed disgust. An older woman with silver streaking through black hair leaned forward, her eyes sharp as broken glass. "Your Majesty, what is the meaning of this? That Omega is marked rejected. She has no place at this table." Darius settled into his chair with the casual grace of a predator at rest. He did not look at the woman, did not acknowledge the question. Instead, he reached for a carafe of wine and poured 2 goblets, sliding one toward Sarah with deliberate precision. "Sarah will be sitting beside me tonight," he said, his voice flat and final. "If that poses a problem for the council, you are welcome to leave." The silver-haired woman's mouth thinned into a blade. She did not leave. Sarah's hands trembled in her lap. She laced her fingers together to still them, but it did nothing to calm the frantic beating of her heart. Around the hall, wolves had begun returning to their seats, though most kept glancing toward the high table with expressions that made her skin crawl. Darius turned his head slightly, just enough that his next words were clearly meant for her. "You are going to smile," Sarah's breath caught. "You are going to eat." His tone was conversational, almost pleasant, but underneath it ran a current of absolute command. "And when they ask questions, let me answer." Sarah forced her lips into something that might pass for a smile. It felt like cracking ice across her face. Darius's expression did not change, but she saw the slight tension in his jaw ease. Approval, perhaps. Or simply satisfaction that she was capable of following instructions. A servant appeared beside her, placing a plate of roasted meat and winter vegetables before her. The smell should have been appetizing. Instead, her stomach churned. She picked up her fork, made herself take a bite. Chewed mechanically, swallowed. The meat tasted like ash. Movement across the hall caught her attention. Beta Rovan stood from his table, golden hair catching the candlelight, his new mate's hand resting on his arm. He was smiling. Not the warm smile Sarah remembered from their courtship, but something sharper, crueler. He raised his goblet in a mock toast, his voice carrying across the sudden quiet, to unexpected pairings. "Though I must say, Your Majesty, I did not think you had a taste for broken things." Laughter rippled through parts of the crowd, scattered, nervous, but laughter nonetheless. Sarah's fork froze halfway to her mouth, heat flooded her face. The rejection slash on her shoulder burned as if freshly branded. Darius did not move, did not raise his voice. He simply turned his head and looked at Rovan with eyes that had gone utterly cold. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rovan's smile faltered, his hand tightened around his goblet. His mate shifted uncomfortably beside him. "I do not recall asking for your opinion, Beta Rovan." Darius's voice was soft. "Lethal. Nor do I recall giving you permission to speak." The silence that followed was absolute. Rovan opened his mouth, closed it, sat down slowly, his face flushed with humiliation. Darius returned his attention to his plate as if nothing had happened. But Sarah felt the shift in the room, the sudden wariness, the reminder that the man beside her had broken 3 alpha bloodlines in a single winter and had not grown softer since. A servant approached the high table carrying a silver tray. On it rested a single goblet, ornate and ancient, etched with symbols Sarah did not recognize. The servant placed it before her with a slight bow. "The ceremonial toast," the silver-haired councilwoman announced, her voice carrying to the far corners of the hall. "A tradition for all new pairings." The Omega drinks first, to show trust and faith in the bond. Sarah stared at the goblet. Something about it made her skin prickle with instinctive warning. The wine inside was darker than normal, almost black in the candlelight, and the smell rising from it was wrong. Too sweet, too sharp. She reached for it slowly, her fingers brushing the cold metal. Darius's hand shot out and closed over hers. "Allow me." Before anyone could protest, he lifted the goblet from her grip and raised it to his own lips. The hall went deathly silent. Every eye fixed on the king as he drank deeply, his throat working as he swallowed. Once, twice, 3 times. He lowered the empty goblet and set it back on the tray with a soft clink. "Moonshard," he said quietly, his gaze sweeping across the council table. "A truth serum used to expose social climbers and pretenders. How thoughtful of you to provide it." The silver-haired woman's face went carefully blank. "It is tradition, Your Majesty. Meant to ensure purity of intention." "Of course." Darius's smile did not reach his eyes. "Then you will be pleased to know my intentions are entirely pure. Sarah is under my protection. Anyone who questions that is welcome to take it up with me directly." He did not break eye contact with the council, did not blink. The Moonshard would force him to speak only truth, and he had just declared her his in front of every wolf in Moonfell. The message was unmistakable. "She is mine. Touch her and answer to me." Musicians began playing somewhere in the hall, a signal that the formal portion of the ceremony was ending, and the dancing would begin. Wolves rose from their tables, moving toward the open floor in the center of the room. Darius stood and offered Sarah his hand. "Dance with me." It was not a request. Nothing he said was ever a request. Sarah took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Her legs felt unsteady. Her mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. Why the king would drink poison meant for her. Why he would claim her so publicly. Why any of this made sense. He led her down from the high table and onto the dance floor. Other couples moved around them in the formal patterns of the Luna waltz, but Sarah barely saw them. She placed her hand on Darius's shoulder, felt his palm settle at her waist, and let him guide her into the first steps. He moved with surprising grace for someone so large, each step precise. Controlled. He pulled her close enough that no one else could hear his words. "Someone wants you dead before midnight." Sarah stumbled. His grip tightened, keeping her upright, keeping the dance flowing as if he had said nothing more threatening than a comment about the weather. "What?" "The Moonshard was not meant to expose you," Darius continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was meant to kill you. The dose was 10 times stronger than tradition requires. You would have been dead in minutes." Sarah's breath came in short, sharp gasps. "But you drank it." "I have built immunity to most common poisons. An unfortunate necessity of wearing a crown." His dark eyes bored into hers. "You did not answer my question in the circle. So I will ask it again now. Do you want to live?" "Yes." The word came out strangled. "Then listen carefully. You are going to smile. You are going to dance. And when this is over, you are going to come with me to a private room where I will explain exactly what is happening and what I need from you." His fingers flexed against her waist. "But here now, in front of everyone, you are going to act like you are exactly where you want to be. Can you do that?" Sarah's mind spun. She thought of the empty boarding house room, the textile shop that barely paid enough to survive, the way people crossed the street to avoid her, the slash on her shoulder that would mark her forever. She thought of Rovin's mocking toast, the council's disgust, the poison that would have killed her if Darius had not intervened, and she thought of the cold certainty in the king's eyes. The brutal honesty of a man who had just told her someone wanted her dead and was offering her a choice between being bait or being buried. She forced herself to smile, to follow his lead, to let the dance carry her through the moment like a leaf caught in a current. "Yes," she whispered, "I can do that." Darius's expression did not change. But something in his eyes shifted. Recognition, perhaps, or respect for someone who understood how to survive. They danced until the song ended, until the applause rippled through the hall, until Darius released her and offered his arm, leading her away from the crowd toward a corridor that branched off from the main hall. And Sarah realized with crystalline clarity that she had not been brought here for romance. She had been brought here as a shield, or bait, or both. And whatever game the king had just dropped her into, the pieces were already in motion, and midnight was creeping closer with every passing heartbeat. The corridor stretched long and silent, lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows against stone walls. Syrah's footsteps echoed too loud in the quiet, her black silk dress whispering with each step. Darius walked beside her, his presence a wall of controlled power that seemed to take up more space than his physical form should allow. 2 guards fell into step behind them. Both wore the king's colors, silver and deep blue, with swords at their hips and expressions carved from granite. They did not look at Syrah. Did not acknowledge her existence beyond ensuring she followed where the king led. They climbed a spiral staircase, passing tapestries that depicted ancient battles and moon-blessed ceremonies. The sounds of the lunar ceremony faded below them, music and laughter growing distant until only the sound of their breathing remained. Darius stopped before a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. He pushed it open without ceremony and gestured for Syrah to enter. The room beyond was smaller than she expected. A solar, perhaps, meant for private meetings rather than grand audiences. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across furniture that was functional rather than ornate. A desk sat beneath a window overlooking the city. 2 chairs faced each other near the fire. Maps covered one wall, marked with pins and colored thread. The guards took positions on either side of the door as it closed, sealing her inside with the king. Syrah stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped before her, not sure where to look or what to do. Every instinct screamed that she did not belong here, that she should bow, apologize, make herself small. Darius moved to a side table and poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal pitcher. He handed one to her without asking if she wanted it. "Drink, you have not had anything since we left the hall." Syrah took the glass. Her hands shook slightly, making the water ripple. She sipped it slowly, grateful for something to do with her mouth besides speak. Darius settled into one of the chairs by the fire and gestured to the other. "Sit." She sat. The chair was deep and comfortable, but she perched on the edge, spine straight, ready to bolt if necessary. Darius studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable in the firelight. His chainmail had been removed at some point, leaving him in a black tunic and leather bracers. His long brown hair fell loose past his shoulders, softening features that were otherwise all sharp angles and brutal beauty. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing trade agreements rather than upending her entire existence. "I am going to explain what is happening. You are going to listen without interrupting. When I am finished, you will make a choice. Do you understand?" Syrah nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good." Darius leaned back in his chair, one hand resting on the armrest, the other holding his water glass. "Publicly, you are now my consort. The entire court witnessed me claim you during the Luna ceremony. That claim is binding in the eyes of tradition and law." Sarah's grip tightened on her glass. "Privately, our arrangement is far simpler. You will act as my consort in public settings. You will attend council meetings, ceremonial events, and any other functions where a Luna is expected to appear. You will have your own rooms in the royal wing. We will not share a bed. We will not engage in any romantic or physical relationship beyond what is necessary to maintain the appearance of a bond." He paused, watching her carefully. "Your role is straightforward. Survive long enough to distract my enemies." The words landed like stones in still water. Syrah found her voice, though it came out rough. "Distract them from what?" "From me." Darius set his glass aside. "The council has been demanding I take a Luna for 3 years. They want me married into House Thorn, specifically. A match that would unite the grain roots with military command and give the priesthood direct influence over the throne." Syrah knew House Thorn by reputation, old power, temple connections, control over the harvest that fed half of Dracaroon. A marriage into that house would be a political earthquake. "I have refused every match they proposed," Darius continued, "so they have begun exploring other options, forcing my hand through pressure, manipulation, and as of tonight, assassination." The moon shard. Yes, the dose was lethal. Designed to look like you simply could not handle the truth serum, a tragic accident that would remove both you and any claim I might have made by choosing you. His jaw tightened. "The goblet came from a servant who works in the kitchens. That servant is employed by Ashridge Pack." "Rovan!" Sarah's stomach turned cold. Why would Rovan want me dead? He already rejected me. I am nothing to him. You are not nothing. You are a piece on a board you did not know you were playing on. Darius leaned forward, elbows on his knees, gaze intense. 3 days ago, documents surfaced claiming you had been forging lunar writs. Letters supposedly written in your hand, addressed to palace guards, implying you were using seduction and manipulation to gain access to the throne. The forgeries are crude but effective enough to plant doubt. Sarah's breath caught. I wrote no such letters. I know, but someone wanted the council to believe you did. Someone wanted you painted as a social climber, a rejected Omega trying to claw her way back to relevance through deception. He tilted his head slightly. And when I chose you tonight, whoever set this trap likely panicked. If you live long enough to speak, you might expose the forgeries. So they moved to silence you permanently. The fire crackled. Sarah stared into the flames, her mind racing. You knew about the poison before tonight. I suspected. I have people who watch for these things. Darius's voice was flat. I chose you precisely because of the trap. Whoever is behind this needed you to be invisible, easily discredited, easily killed. By pulling you into the light and claiming you publicly, I forced them to act recklessly. You used me as bait. Yes. No apology, no softening of the truth. Just brutal honesty delivered with the same calm he might use to discuss the weather. Sarah set her glass down before she dropped it. Her hands were shaking again, but this time with something sharper than fear. Anger, perhaps. Or the bitter understanding that she had been a pawn in someone else's game from the moment Rovan rejected her. Why me? Her voice came out harder than intended. There are dozens of rejected Omegas in Moonfell. Why was I chosen for this trap? Darius met her gaze without flinching. Because you are invisible. A rejected Omega with no family, no pack, no connections, someone who could disappear without anyone asking questions. Someone the council would dismiss as irrelevant the moment they learned of your existence. He paused. That is what made you perfect, for the trap, and for me. The words settled over her like frost. You needed someone no one cared about. I needed someone who could stand beside me without drawing unwanted attention until I could identify who is moving against me. Darius's expression did not change. You are not the target. You are the distraction. And that makes you valuable in ways you do not yet understand. Sarah laughed. The sound was sharp and humorless. Valuable. I have been called many things since my rejection. Valuable was never one of them. Then you were underestimated. Darius stood, moving to the window. He looked out over Moonfell's glittering lights, his profile stark against the darkness beyond. The council believes I chose you out of impulse or spite. They will spend the next several days trying to understand my motives, trying to pressure me to rescind the claim, trying to maneuver around you. While they are distracted, I can work. Work on what? Finding out who wants me dead and why. He glanced back at her. The assassination attempt tonight was not aimed at you alone. If you had died from the Moonshard, the scandal would have destroyed my credibility. The council could have used it as evidence that I am unfit to rule, unstable, dangerous. They would have forced a vote and removed me from the throne within a week. Sarah absorbed this slowly. Political machinery she barely understood, grinding toward violence she could not have imagined. So, what happens now? She asked quietly. Darius turned from the window and walked back to his chair. He did not sit. Instead, he stood before her, tall and immovable, every inch the War King who had broken 3 bloodlines in a single winter. Now you make a choice. His voice was soft. Final. Walk away tonight. I will have my guards escort you to the border by dawn. You will have enough coin to start over somewhere far from Dracaroon, far from the reach of whoever set this trap. You will be alive, but you will also be alone, and there is no guarantee they will not find you eventually. He paused, letting the weight of that option settle. Or you step into this lie and live. You become my consort in name. You attend council meetings and ceremonies. You smile when required, and speak when I tell you to speak. You follow my lead in public, and keep your own counsel in private. In exchange, you have protection, status, and the resources of the crown at your disposal. You will have a room of your own, coin of your own. And when this is over, When I have rooted out whoever is behind this, you will walk away with more than you came with." Sarah stared up at him. The firelight cast half his face in shadow, making him look like something carved from stone and darkness. "And if I die before it is over?" "Then you die standing instead of running. No false comfort, no empty promises. Just the truth laid bare like a blade on a table." "I will not lie to you, Sarah. This is dangerous. You will be a target, but you are already a target. The question is whether you face it with a king's protection or face it alone." The room fell silent except for the fire's crackling and the distant sounds of the city below. Sarah thought of the boarding house room with its thin walls and colder nights, the textile shop where she worked for barely enough to survive, the way people looked through her as if she were already a ghost. She thought of Rovin's mocking toast, the council's disgust, the poison that would have killed her if Darius had not intervened. She thought of the rejection slash on her shoulder that would mark her forever, no matter where she ran. And she thought of the man standing before her, offering her a choice between death in the shadows and death in the light. At least in the light she might see her enemies coming. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I want the truth. All of it. No more games. No more using me as bait without warning." Darius studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "Agreed. You will know what I know. When I can tell you. And I want your word that when this is over, you will honor the bargain. I walk away with my life and my freedom." "You have it." Sarah stood. Her legs felt steadier than they had all night. She met his gaze directly, this dangerous king who had pulled her from obscurity and thrown her into a war she barely understood. "Then I choose the lie." Something flickered in Darius's eyes. Approval, perhaps, or simply satisfaction that she understood how to survive. He extended his hand. "Welcome to the game, Sarah." She took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, utterly steady. "Try to keep me alive long enough to regret it," she said quietly. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "I will do my best." The royal wing of the palace was a maze of corridors and chambers that smelled of beeswax and old stone. Sarah's new room was larger than the entire boarding house she had been living in, with windows that overlooked the gardens and furniture that looked like it belonged in paintings rather than actual use. A wardrobe stood against one wall, already filled with dresses in jewel tones and soft fabrics. A writing desk sat beneath the window. The bed was large enough for 3 people, piled with furs and silk pillows that probably cost more than she had earned in a year of textile work. It felt like a cage dressed up as luxury. Sarah stood in the center of the room, still wearing her black ceremonial dress, and tried to remember how to breathe normally. A knock sounded at the door. "Enter?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 40s, lean and muscular, with auburn hair pulled back in a severe braid. She wore leather armor marked with the king's colors and moved with the dangerous grace of someone who knew exactly how to kill efficiently. "Captain Ysela," the woman said by way of introduction, "the king has assigned me to your training." Sarah blinked. "Training? You are going to be appearing in public as the king's consort. That means you need to know how to move, how to speak, and how to read a room before it eats you alive." Ysela's expression was not unkind, but it was utterly lacking in sympathy. "We start at dawn. Get some sleep. You will need it." She left before Sarah could respond, the door clicking shut with quiet finality. Sarah did not sleep well. Her dreams were full of fire and whispers, and Rovin's face twisted in disgust. She woke before dawn with her heart pounding and the rejection slash on her shoulder burning like it had been freshly branded. Training began in a private courtyard hidden behind the palace's eastern wing. Ysela was already waiting, dressed in practice leathers, with a wooden staff resting against the stone wall. "We are not teaching you to fight," Ysela said as Sarah approached. "You are an Omega. No one expects you to be dangerous with a blade. What we are teaching you is court scent." Sarah frowned. "I do not understand." "Wolves communicate through more than words. Posture. Breath. The way you hold tension in your body. All of it sends signals to other wolves about dominance, submission, fear, confidence." Ysela circled her slowly, eyes sharp. "Right now you broadcast fear like a beacon. Every wolf in 100 paces can smell it. That makes you prey. I am not sure I can simply stop being afraid." "You do not have to stop being afraid." You have to stop showing it. Gisela stopped in front of her. Stand straighter, shoulders back, chin level, eyes forward, not down. Sarah adjusted her posture. It felt unnatural. Exposed. Better. Now breathe. Slow and steady. Fear makes your breath shallow. Predators hear it. Control your breath, control the signal. They spent hours on breathing. On posture. On the micro-expressions that wolves read instinctively. Gisela was relentless, correcting every slouch, every downcast glance, every nervous fidget. You are Omega, soft, Gisela said during a break, handing Sarah water. That is not weakness, that is camouflage. Wolves underestimate soft things. They speak freely around people they do not consider threats. You are going to use that. Over the following days, the training expanded. Gisela taught her how to enter a room last and listen to conversations already in progress. How to ask innocent questions that prompted people to reveal more than they intended. How to position herself near powerful wolves during gatherings so she could overhear their private discussions. Your Omega softness is your greatest weapon, Gisela explained. People will dismiss you, ignore you, say things in front of you they would never say in front of the king. You are going to be our ears in places the crown cannot reach. Sarah absorbed the lessons with growing fascination. For the first time since her rejection, someone was treating her existence as useful rather than shameful. It was a strange, heady feeling. Between training sessions, she began exploring the palace. Not the grand halls or public chambers, but the service corridors and back staircases where servants moved and gossip flowed like water. It was in one of these corridors, specifically in the kitchens where she had gone to request tea, that she found the ledger. It was tucked behind sacks of flour in the storage room, bound in worn leather, and marked with a symbol she did not immediately recognize. A crescent moon overlaid with a thorn. She flipped through the pages carefully, her heart beating faster with each entry. The ledger recorded payments, dates, amounts, and initials that meant nothing to her at first. But as she traced the entries backward through time, one date jumped out at her like a brand. The day Rovan rejected her. A payment of 500 gold marks, initialed R.A. Rovan Ashridge. Below it, another entry. 100 gold marks, initialed H.T. House Thorn. Sarah's hands trembled as she closed the ledger and carefully replaced it behind the flour sacks. Her mind raced, connecting pieces she had not known were part of the same puzzle. Rovan had been paid to reject her. House Thorn had been involved. But why? She needed to tell Darius. Immediately. That night, there was a council dinner. Sarah attended in a gown of deep emerald that made her pale skin look luminous. She sat beside Darius at the high table, her posture perfect, her breathing controlled, her expression serene. Under the table, Darius's hand rested on her knee. A possessive gesture for anyone watching, a signal to the court that she was claimed, protected, his, but there was no warmth in the touch. It was tactical, performative. In private, they remained distant. Darius worked late into the night in his study. Sarah retreated to her own chambers. They did not speak beyond what was necessary for public appearances. Yet she found herself watching him during these performances. The way he moved through rooms like a predator assessing threats. The careful control he maintained over every gesture, every word, every micro-expression. And she noticed something else. After moonrise, when the silver light flooded through windows and the wolf nature in every creature stirred closer to the surface, Darius's right hand developed a tremor. It was subtle, barely perceptible. He hid it with brutal discipline, keeping that hand occupied with wine glasses or papers or folded behind his back, but Sarah's new training had taught her to notice details. And once she saw it, she could not unsee it. During a council meeting 2 weeks after the Luna ceremony, she watched him grip the armrest of his throne to still the shaking, watched him shift position so his right hand was hidden from view, watched the tension in his jaw as he fought against something he clearly did not want anyone to notice. After the meeting, when they were alone in the corridor leading back to the royal wing, Sarah spoke quietly. Your hand, after moonrise. What causes it? Darius stopped walking. For a moment she thought he might refuse to answer, might tell her it was none of her concern. Instead, he looked at her with something that might have been surprise. Or possibly respect. You are observant. You taught me to be. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. gone before it could fully form. "It is a complication from the war, nothing that concerns you." But the way he said it, the careful neutrality of his tone, told Sarah there was far more to the story. That whatever caused that tremor was not simply a wound from battle, it was something deeper, more dangerous, something he was hiding with the same brutal discipline he applied to everything else. Sarah stood in the empty corridor, watching him walk away toward his study, and realized that the man who had pulled her into this game had secrets that ran deeper than politics or power plays. Secrets that might be the real reason he needed someone invisible standing beside him. And for the first time since accepting his bargain, she wondered if she had agreed to far more than either of them had spoken aloud. The library in the palace's western wing was older than the current dynasty. Sarah discovered it 3 weeks into her role as consort, tucked behind a servants' corridor that most nobles never bothered to explore. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held books bound in leather so old it cracked at the touch, manuscripts written in languages she could barely read, and records that dated back centuries. She went there when she needed to think. When the weight of performing for the council grew too heavy, and the careful distance Darius maintained became suffocating in its precision. Today, she went because of what she had overheard. 2 priestesses from House Thorn had been speaking in the palace gardens, their voices low but not low enough. Sarah had been walking the paths, practicing the technique Wisela called invisible presence, moving so quietly that people forgot she was there. The test was conclusive, the younger priestess had said, her tone tight with worry. She dampens the resonance field within 3 paces. If she stands too close during the ceremony, the entire binding could collapse. Then we ensure she does not stand close, the elder replied coldly. The king's infatuation will not last. And when it fades, we will have our proper Luna, one who strengthens the bonds rather than corrupting them. Sarah had frozen behind a hedge of winter roses, her heart pounding so hard she thought they might hear it. Dampens the resonance field, corrupts the bonds. The words the priestess had spoken 3 months ago during her rejection ceremony came back with brutal clarity. The bond is corrupted. She is Null Howl. She had never understood what that meant. Had never been given the chance to ask before Rovan cast her out, and the temple attendants burned the rejection slash across her skin. Now, standing in the library with dust motes floating through shafts of afternoon light, Sarah pulled volume after volume from the shelves. Ancient texts on wolf magic, treatises on mate bonds and their sacred properties, histories of the Luna ceremonies and the power they channeled. It took hours of searching, her eyes straining in the dim light, before she found it. A slim manuscript bound in midnight blue leather, its pages yellowed with age. The title was written in silver ink that had faded to ghost pale, on the nature of bond nullification and its manifestations among wolfkind. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it. The text was dense, written in the formal language of scholars centuries dead. But certain passages leaped out at her like accusations. A Null Howl is born, not made, appearing perhaps once in 10 generations. Their presence disrupts the ethereal threads that bind mate to mate, pack to pack, subject to sovereign. Within arm's reach, bonds weaken, magic falters. The carefully woven tapestry of wolf society begins to unravel. Sarah's breath came shallow and fast. Such individuals are dangerous to any power structure that relies upon magical compulsion to maintain order. Throughout history, Null Howls have been eliminated, exiled, or bound in ways that prevent their influence from spreading. They cannot be allowed to stand near seats of power, for their very existence threatens the foundations upon which wolf kingdoms are built. The book slipped from her numb fingers and hit the floor with a sound like a judge's gavel. She was not broken because she was weak. She was dangerous because she disrupted the very magic that held Drakarun together. Rovan had not rejected her out of disgust or disappointment. He had rejected her because someone had tested her and discovered what she was. Someone who needed her gone. Someone who understood that a Null Howl near the throne would unravel everything they had built. The ledger in the kitchen, the payments to Rovan, the involvement of House Thorn, they had engineered her rejection. Paid Rovan to cast her out publicly, to brand her with shame so complete that no one would ever look at her twice. She was supposed to disappear into obscurity. Live out her days invisible and irrelevant, too broken to ever come near power again. But Darius had pulled her back into the light. Why? Sarah gathered the manuscript and left the library, her mind racing. She needed answers. And there was only one person who could give them to her. She found Darius in his private study, a room she had only entered once before. He sat at his desk surrounded by maps and correspondence, his right hand hidden beneath the table in that way he always positioned himself after moonrise. The silver light streaming through the window cast harsh shadows across his face. He looked up as she entered, surprise flickering across his features before his mask of control slammed back into place. "You did not knock. I know what I am." Sarah closed the door behind her and set the manuscript on his desk with enough force to make papers rustle. "I know why Rovan rejected me. And I need you to tell me why you chose me knowing what I am." Darius's eyes flicked to the manuscript, then back to her face. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he stood, moving to the window with his back to her, his right hand carefully hidden at his side. "How much do you know?" "Enough. I am a null howl. My presence weakens mate bonds and disrupts the magic that holds pack structures together. That is why the priestess declared me corrupted. Why Rovan rejected me so violently. Why House Thorn paid him to do it publicly and permanently." Her voice shook, but she forced herself to continue. "What I do not know is why you would risk everything to claim someone like me. Unless you needed exactly that disruption." Darius was silent for so long that Sarah thought he might refuse to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Come here." Sarah crossed to the window, stood beside him looking out over Moonfell's sprawling streets and distant walls. The city glittered in the fading light, beautiful and fragile as glass. "What do you know about how wolf kings rule?" Darius asked. "Through bonds. Through the mate connection to their luna that ties them to the packs, creates a web of loyalty and magic that flows from throne to territory." "Correct. The Luna ceremony is not simply tradition. It is a mechanism, a way to funnel collective devotion through the royal bond and transform it into tangible power. The king and his Luna stand at the center of a vast network of magical threads, and through those threads flow resources, loyalty, obedience." He paused. "And control." Sarah frowned. "I do not understand. The ceremonies conducted by House Thorn do not simply celebrate bonds, they harvest them. Channel the magic generated by hundreds of wolves pledging devotion and direct it into what they call the Moon Bank, a vault of divine power controlled entirely by the priesthood." His jaw tightened. "Whoever controls the Moon Bank controls Dracaroon, not through armies or laws, but through the very magic that binds our society together." The implications crashed over Sarah like ice water. "House Thorn wants you married to one of their own so they can access that power through your Luna." "Yes. And if I refuse, they will find a way to remove me and install someone more cooperative." The assassination attempt at the Luna ceremony was only the beginning. He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw something she had never expected to see from him: vulnerability. But their entire system relies on one fundamental assumption, that the king can feel the mate bond, that he is connected to the magical network they control. Sarah's breath caught. "You cannot feel it, no." The word was simple. Final. "I have been bond deaf since the war. A wound I do not fully understand, but one that has cut me off from the very magic that is supposed to define my right to rule. If the council discovers this, they will declare me spirit unfit and force me from the throne within days." "So you chose me to hide it?" Sarah's mind raced, pieces clicking into place with terrible clarity. "A null howl consort explains why there is no bond between us. You can claim I dampen the connection, that my presence makes it impossible for anyone to sense whether you are bond deaf or simply being disrupted by my nature." "Yes." Darius's expression was carved from stone, but something in his eyes burned with an intensity that stole her breath. "You are the perfect shield. Your existence provides cover for my defect, and more than that, you are the only person who can stand beside me without being magically manipulated through the bond network House Thorn controls." The truth settled over Sarah like a weighted blanket, suffocating and inescapable. She had thought Darius saved her out of political necessity, a move to distract his enemies while he maneuvered for position, but it was so much deeper than that, so much more dangerous. He had not pulled her from obscurity despite what she was, he had chosen her because of it. "The council does not know," Sarah said slowly. "They think you chose me out of impulse or spite. They will not figure it out immediately, but eventually someone will ask the right questions. Make the right connections. Darius moved closer, his dark eyes locked on hers. When that happens, we will both be targets. You because your nature threatens their power structure. Me because my defect proves I have no right to the throne they want to control. Then why tell me this now? Because you deserve to know what you are fighting for, and because you need to understand what happens at the next Luna ceremony. Sarah's stomach dropped. What happens? House Thorn will attempt to complete the harvest ritual. They will channel power through whatever bonds they can reach, trying to feed the moon bank and solidify their control. Your presence will disrupt it, but only if you are close enough to the ritual center. He paused. They know this, which is why they will try to keep you away from the ceremony floor, or eliminate you before it begins. How? The choir blessing. Darius's voice went flat. Dangerous. During every Luna ceremony, a temple singer is chosen to perform the sacred hymn. It is meant to be a benediction, a call to the divine. But certain songs, when sung at specific frequencies by trained vocalists, become weapons. Sarah's blood ran cold. Whale blades. You have heard of them. In stories, assassins who kill with sound. Songs that can stop hearts or shatter minds. She had thought they were myths. Horror tales told to frighten children. They are real. And House Thorn has trained them for generations. Darius's right hand trembled at his side, the tremor more pronounced in the moonlight streaming through the window. He noticed her gaze and deliberately stilled it, though she could see the effort it cost him. The singer assigned to perform the blessing at the upcoming ceremony is one of them. Her song will be targeted at Omega Hearts specifically, designed to collapse your cardiovascular system mid-note. You are telling me they plan to kill me in front of the entire court, during a sacred ceremony, using a weapon no one will recognize as such. Yes, no apology, no false comfort, just brutal honesty laid bare. They will make it look like you simply could not withstand the divine resonance, too weak, too broken. A tragic but understandable consequence of bringing a null howl into a sacred space. Sarah turned away from him, her mind reeling. Every revelation stacked on top of the last, until she felt buried under the weight of conspiracies she had never asked to be part of. She had known this was dangerous, had accepted Darius's bargain with open eyes. But knowing someone wanted her dead in abstract terms was different from understanding the specific mechanism of her planned murder. Why are you telling me this? Her voice came out hoarse. You could simply keep me away from the ceremony, hide me somewhere safe until the danger passes. Because hiding you proves we are afraid. It shows weakness. And the moment we show weakness, they will strike harder and faster until one of us is dead and the other is broken. Darius moved to stand beside her again. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him despite the careful distance he always maintained. I am telling you because I need you to understand what we are truly facing. This is not simply about political maneuvering or crown games. This is about two people who do not fit into the system they are supposed to serve, standing against powers that would rather see us erased than risk the disruption we represent. Sarah looked up at him, at this dangerous king who had pulled her from nothing and thrown her into everything. His face was all sharp angles in the moonlight, beautiful and brutal in equal measure. His right hand still trembled at his side, that secret defect he hid with such brutal discipline. He had not saved her out of pity, he had not chosen her out of impulse. He had pulled her close because she was the only person in all of Dracaroon who could stand beside him without being leashed by the magical bonds that controlled everyone else. The only person who could disrupt the very power structure that sought to control them both. She was not his shield, she was his weapon, and he was hers. What do we do? Sarah asked quietly. Darius's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile, but held the same sharp edge as a blade catching light. We go to the ceremony. We stand in the sacred circle. And when they try to kill you with a song designed to shatter Omega Hearts, you do what you were born to do. His dark eyes burned into hers. You break their magic before it can break you. The second Luna ceremony came too quickly. 4 weeks after Darius had pulled Sarah into the light, the council announced another gathering. Not the annual ceremony, but a special convocation called to address what they termed irregularities in the royal bond. The hall would be smaller, the guest list more exclusive, but the ritual would be the same. House Thorn insisted on it. Sarah stood in her chambers the night before, staring at the gown laid out on her bed. Deep crimson silk that looked like spilled blood in the lamplight. Gold embroidery traced patterns across the bodice, wolves and moons and thorns intertwined in ways that made her stomach turn. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Darius entered without waiting for permission, as he always did. He wore black and silver, his long brown hair pulled back from his face in a way that made him look both younger and more dangerous. His right hand was tucked into his belt, hiding the tremor that came with moonrise. "Tomorrow," he said without preamble, "you will stand in the sacred circle. The temple will begin the binding chants. The singer will prepare to launch the killing note." He moved closer, his dark eyes burning into hers. "When I squeeze your hand 3 times, you step forward and release everything you are. Do you understand?" They had developed a language of touch over the past weeks. Small signals that looked like intimacy to watching eyes but carried tactical weight between them. 1 squeeze meant lie detected, 2 meant stall for time, 3 meant strike now. "I understand," Sarah said quietly. "But if I fail? If the null howl is not strong enough to stop the song? Then we both die and House Thorn wins. No false comfort. No empty reassurances. But I do not believe you will fail. You have spent your entire life suppressing what you are, trying to make yourself smaller so the world would not notice. Tomorrow, I need you to be everything they fear." Sarah met his gaze. "And after? If we survive this?" "After, we face whatever comes next." His hand moved to her shoulder, not quite touching, hovering just above the rejection slash that marked her skin beneath the silk. Together. It was the closest he had ever come to acknowledging that their bargain had shifted into something neither of them had words for yet. Not romance, not friendship, but a partnership forged in fire and desperation, 2 broken pieces that somehow fit together in ways that whole ones never could. "Get some sleep," Darius said, stepping back. "Tomorrow changes everything." He left, and Sarah stood alone in the crimson gown's shadow, wondering if she would live long enough to see what everything became. The ceremony hall was smaller than the grand space where Darius had first claimed her, but no less magnificent. Vaulted ceilings rose overhead, crossed with iron beams from which hung a canopy of lunar crystals. Each crystal was the size of a fist, perfectly clear, catching and refracting light until the entire ceiling looked like a constellation brought to earth. Sarah entered on Darius's arm, her crimson gown trailing behind her like a wound. The assembled nobles watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. The council sat at the high table, silver-robed and stone-faced. And at the front of the hall, near the sacred circle marked by candles and carved moonstone, stood the temple choir. The singer who would perform the blessing was young, perhaps 20, with pale blonde hair and eyes the color of winter sky. She wore the silver and white robes of House Thorn's priesthood, and when she smiled at Sarah, it was the gentle, warm expression of someone offering comfort. Sarah felt ice slide down her spine. That was the assassin. The whale-blade trained to kill with a song that would look like nothing more than divine rejection of a null howl who had dared stand in sacred space. Darius led her to the center of the hall, to the circle where they had stood once before. His hand rested at her waist, warm and steady despite the tremor she knew he was fighting to control. They took their positions, and the hall fell silent. The high priestess from House Thorn rose from her seat at the council table. She was the same woman who had declared Sarah corrupted 3 months ago, the same cold beauty who had watched while temple attendants burned the rejection slash across her shoulder. "We gather tonight," the priestess said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "to complete the blessing denied at the previous ceremony, to sanctify the bond between king and consort, and to ensure the divine approval of this union." She gestured to the choir, and they began to sing. The sound was beautiful, haunting, voices blending in harmonies that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, wrapping around the assembled wolves like silk. The candles marking the sacred circle flared brighter. The lunar crystals overhead began to hum, a resonance that Sarah felt in her bones. This was the binding chant. The mechanism House Thorn used to funnel devotion and magic from the assembled wolves into the moonbank they controlled. Power harvested from bonds forged and maintained through ritual and repetition. Sarah felt the pressure of it building, pressing down on her shoulders like invisible hands. Around the hall, wolves swayed slightly, their eyes glazing as the magic took hold, compulsion disguised as worship. Control wrapped in ceremony. Darius's hand tightened at her waist. Once, twice, 3 times. Strike now. Sarah stepped forward, out of his grip, into the exact center of the sacred circle. The blonde singer opened her mouth, inhaling for the note that would kill, and Sarah released everything she had spent her entire life suppressing. The null howl tore out of her like a storm breaking through shutters. It was not a sound exactly, more a pressure, a negation. A force that ripped through the magical threads binding the hall together and shredded them like spider silk in wind. The choir's voices cut off mid-note, as if someone had severed their throats. The binding chant collapsed into sudden, absolute silence. The candles guttered and went dark, and the luna crystals overhead, those perfect vessels of harvested power, began to crack. The sound was like ice breaking on a frozen lake, sharp, final, inevitable. The first crystal shattered, raining glittering fragments down like starlight, then another, and another. The cascade spread across the entire canopy, each crystal exploding in sequence, filling the air with glass that caught what little light remained and transformed it into something between beautiful and terrifying. Wolves dove for cover, nobles screamed, guards raised shields over the council table as crystal shards rained down like divine judgment. Through it all, Sarah stood in the center of the circle, her arms spread, her head thrown back, feeling the null howl pulse out of her in waves that left her breathless and exhilarated and more alive than she had felt since the day Rovan rejected her. The blonde singer collapsed to her knees, hands clutching at her throat. The killing note had turned inward, caught in her own vocal cords by the disruption Sarah created. And as she gasped for air, struggling against the magic that was eating her from the inside, something on her throat began to glow. A mark. A brand. A sigil burned into her skin beneath the collar of her robes. A crescent moon overlaid with a thorn. The mark from the ledger. The symbol of House Thorne's conspiracy made visible for everyone to see. The hall erupted in chaos. "Assassin!" someone shouted. "The temple tried to kill the king's consort. House Thorne is behind this!" The high priestess lunged to her feet, her face bone-white with fury and fear. "This is a lie, a trick of the null howl's corruption. She has poisoned the sacred space and turned our own magic against us." "Enough." Darius's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. He moved to stand beside Sarah, his presence a wall of controlled power that commanded attention without needing volume. "The evidence is clear. Your assassin bears House Thorne's mark. Your ritual was designed not to bless but to harvest power for your own purposes. And your attempt to remove my consort has failed." The silver-haired councilwoman who had questioned Sarah's presence at the first ceremony rose slowly. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, taking in the shattered crystals and the glowing sigil and the way common wolves were beginning to gather at the edges of the hall with expressions that spoke of long-suppressed rage. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "while the assassination attempt is clearly House Thorne's doing, the fact remains that your consort has just destroyed the Luna crystals. Sacred objects blessed by generations of priestesses, objects that channel the divine connection between throne and territory." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "A king who cannot maintain the sacred bond has no right to rule. The law is clear. We must call for your abdication." Silence crashed down over the hall like a physical weight. Sarah's heart stopped. This was the moment they had known was coming. The trap within the trap. House Thorne's assassination had failed, but the destruction of the Luna crystals gave the council the legal justification they needed to remove Darius anyway. Darius stood utterly still, his face carved from winter stone. Then slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward until he stood at the edge of the circle, facing the council and the assembled nobles with his chin raised and his shoulders back. "You want the truth?" His voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the hall. "I will give it to you." Sarah's breath caught. No, he could not. If he revealed his bond deafness now, the council would have him removed before dawn. But Darius had never been a man who hid from hard truths. "I am bond deaf," he said, each word falling like a judge's gavel. "I have been since the war. The magic that is supposed to connect king to territory, throne to pack, has been silent in me for 3 years. I do not feel the mate bond, I do not channel the divine power you claim flows through the Luna crystals. I rule by law and grain and the loyalty I earn through action, not through magic I was born to wield." The hall exploded. Gasps, shouts, the council lurching to their feet, the high priestess's face twisting into something between triumph and rage. "Then you admit it." The silver-haired councilwoman's voice rang clear. "You are spirit, unfit. You have ruled under false pretenses for 3 years, claiming a right you do not possess. The law demands your immediate removal from the throne." "Does it?" Darius's expression did not change. "The law you cite was written by House Thorn to ensure only those they could control through magical bonds could hold power. But I have ruled without that magic. I have fed this kingdom, defended its borders, cut taxes that were bleeding the common wolves dry to fund your temple's excess. If that is unfit, then crown someone who will starve you with hymns and call it divine will." He expected exile. Sarah could see it in the way he held himself, braced for the blow he knew was coming. He had gambled everything on this moment, hoping the truth would be enough. But the council was already moving. Temple loyalists among the guards began drawing steel. The high priestess gestured sharply, and wolves in House Thorn colors moved to surround the sacred circle. This was it, the moment where everything collapsed or held. Sarah stepped forward. She moved to stand beside Darius, close enough that her shoulder brushed his. Close enough that when she reached for his right hand, the one that trembled with the secret he had just exposed to the world, her fingers laced through his with absolute certainty. His hand shook in hers. But she held on. Then she turned to face the hall, and when she spoke, her voice carried with a clarity she had never known she possessed. "You have been ruled by hunger and hymns for generations, fed just enough to survive while your devotion was harvested and channeled into vaults controlled by those who never bled for you, never fought for you, never cut their own power to ensure you had bread through winter." She looked directly at the common wolves gathering at the edges of the hall, the ones who had been invisible in every ceremony she had attended. "He is bond-deaf, yes, but he has ruled you better than any magic-blessed king in living memory. So choose the one who feeds you with actions instead of enchantment. Or choose the ones who would rather see you starve than lose control of the magic they use to keep you leashed." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, one of the common wolves, a young man in work-stained clothes who had no business being in this hall but had somehow found his way in, began to chant, "Darius, Darius, Darius." Another voice joined. Then another. The chant spread like fire through dry grass, common wolves taking up the cry with a fervor that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the simple, desperate truth that they had been heard. The temple loyalists drew their weapons fully now, steel singing as it cleared sheaths. But the king's guards, the ones who were paid by the crown instead of owing vows to the temple, moved to interpose themselves. Shields raised, swords drawn. A line formed between the throne and those who would take it. The hall balanced on the edge of civil war, held in place by nothing more than the tension of wolves deciding whether to tear each other apart or find another way forward. And in the center of it all, Sarah stood with her fingers laced through Darius's trembling hand, holding on while the kingdom decided whether to rise or fall. The high priestess lunged for the circle's edge, her face twisted with rage. "You will not destroy what we have built. The temple has maintained order in this kingdom for centuries. Without the bonds, without the magic, there is only chaos. Then let there be chaos." Captain Usella's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. She stepped forward from her position among the king's guards, moving with lethal grace until she stood between the priestess and the throne. In her hand, she held a leather-bound ledger, the one Sarah had found in the palace kitchens weeks ago. "Because I would rather have honest chaos than poisoned order." She opened the ledger, holding it high enough for the council to see. Payments from House Thorn to Beta Rovan of Ashridge, dated the day of Sarah's rejection. 500 gold marks to cast out a null howl, who threatened their power structure. Additional payments to forge documents in her name. To plant the moonshard poison at the first ceremony. To hire the whaleblade we just watched fail. Her eyes were hard as flint. "All marked with your sigil, High Priestess. All traceable directly to House Thorn's private accounts." The priestess's face went from rage to ice-cold calculation in the space between heartbeats. "That ledger is a forgery. A desperate attempt by a bond-deaf king to save his stolen throne. Is it? The silver-haired councilwoman who had called for Darius's abdication moved to take the ledger from Isella's hands. She flipped through pages slowly, her expression unreadable. When she looked up, her eyes had gone sharp as broken glass. These entries match the temple's account records, I should know. I am the one who audits them. She turned to face the high priestess. You have been using sacred funds to commit murder and treason. That is not simply corruption. That is grounds for immediate arrest. The high priestess stepped back, her hand moving to her robes. But before she could reach whatever weapon or escape she had hidden there, Isella's sword was at her throat. Do not move. Isella's voice was soft. Lethal. I would very much enjoy a reason to make this quick. Two of the king's guards moved forward to bind the priestess's hands. She did not struggle, did not scream. Simply stared at Darius with hatred so pure it seemed to burn the air between them. You think this saves you? Her voice was venom wrapped in silk. The council will still remove you. A bond, deaf king cannot hold the throne. It is written in law older than your bloodline. Perhaps. Darius had not moved from Sarah's side, had not released her hand. But I am willing to let the people decide whether that law still serves them. Movement at the edge of the hall caught Sarah's attention. Beta Rovan pushed through the crowd, his golden hair disheveled, his face flushed with wine or rage or both. His new mate tried to pull him back, but he shook her off and lunged toward the sacred circle. You! He snarled, pointing at Sarah. You have destroyed everything. If you had simply disappeared like you were supposed to, none of this would have happened. The temple would still hold power, the bonds would still be sacred, but you had to come back. You had to ruin it all. He moved fast, faster than Sarah expected, closing the distance between them with his hand reaching for her throat. He never made it. Darius intercepted him with brutal efficiency, stepping between Sarah and Rovan without releasing her hand. His other arm came up, forearm catching Rovan across the chest and stopping his momentum with the force of a stone wall. Touch her, Darius said quietly, his voice devoid of all emotion, and you lose the hand you raised. This is not a threat. This is a promise. Rovan stumbled back, eyes wide. For the first time since Sarah had met him, she saw fear written clearly across his features. Not fear of consequences. Fear of the man standing before him, the War King who had broken 3 alpha bloodlines in a single winter and showed no sign of gentleness now. You were paid to reject her, Darius continued, his voice still soft, still lethal. Paid to brand her with shame so complete she would never dare return to power. You took that coin. You spoke those words. You burned that mark into her skin. So before you blame her for ruins you helped build, perhaps you should consider what role you played in your own destruction. A voice rang out from the Ashridge section of the hall. An older man in fine clothes, his face carved with lines of political maneuvering and survival instinct. Ashridge Pact disowns Beta Rovan, effective immediately. His actions were his own. His contracts void. We maintain our loyal trade agreements with the Crown and ask only that this matter be considered settled between houses. Just like that. Rovan was cut loose, abandoned by his own pack, to save their economic interests. His face went from fear to shock to something that looked almost like grief. You cannot, he whispered. I am Ashridge blood. You were Ashridge blood, the older man corrected coldly. Now you are simply a wolf who made poor choices and must live with the consequences. Rovan's new mate turned away from him, moving back toward the Ashridge section without a backward glance. He stood alone in the center of the hall, more thoroughly rejected than Sarah had ever been, and the bitter irony was not lost on her. The silver-haired councilwoman cleared her throat, drawing all attention back to the high table. The matter of House Thorne's treachery is clear. The high priestess will be tried and punished according to law. But the question of the throne remains. She looked at Darius, then at the common wolves still chanting his name, then back to the ledger in her hands. I propose a compromise. The word hung in the air like a blade balanced on its edge. King Darius will remain on the throne. His bond deafness will be acknowledged, but not considered grounds for removal, provided he accepts new limitations on temple taxation and influence. House Thorne will be stripped of its control over the lunar ceremonies and the moon bank. The harvest rituals will be suspended, pending investigation into their true purpose. And the king's consort, she looked directly at Sarah, "will be recognized officially, with all rights and protections that title carries." It was a masterful political move. The council maintained its power by appearing reasonable while gutting House Thorne's influence. Darius kept his throne but within new constraints. And Sarah, the rejected Omega who was supposed to disappear, became officially untouchable by law. "Do you accept these terms, Your Majesty?" the councilwoman asked. Darius looked at Sarah. "Not at the council. Not at the assembled nobles or the chanting common wolves or the shattered crystal fragments still glittering on the floor. Just at her, this woman he had pulled from nothing and trusted with everything." She squeezed his hand once. "Yes." He turned back to the council. "I accept." The hall erupted in applause and arguments in equal measure. Temple loyalists stormed out, their faces dark with rage. Common wolves celebrated, their chants turning into songs of victory. The council began immediate deliberations on the logistics of dismantling House Thorne's infrastructure. Through it all, Sarah stood beside Darius, her fingers still laced through his, feeling the tremor in his hand that he no longer had to hide. The days that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and political maneuvering. The high priestess was tried and found guilty of treason, conspiracy, and murder. She was exiled beyond Drakarun's borders with nothing but the clothes on her back, a mercy some argued she did not deserve. House Thorne's holdings were seized and redistributed. The temple's taxation authority was cut by more than half. Rovan disappeared. Some said he fled north to territories that did not care about pack affiliations. Others said he drank himself to death in a tavern on the border. Sarah did not ask, did not care. He was a piece of her past that no longer had power over her present. Sarah's role as consort was formalized in a ceremony far simpler than the grand Luna gatherings. No choir, no binding chants. Just Darius taking her hand in front of the council and speaking words of recognition that made her position legal and protected. She moved from her chambers in the royal wing to the queen's wing, a series of rooms that overlooked the gardens and gave her space that felt like hers rather than borrowed. The wardrobe filled with gowns. The writing desk accumulated correspondence from nobles seeking favor or common wolves sending grateful letters. The bed remained far too large for one person. Darius kept his own chambers. They maintained the careful distance that had defined their partnership from the beginning, performing intimacy in public, remaining separate in private. It was the bargain they had struck, and neither seemed ready to renegotiate its terms. Until one morning, 3 weeks after the ceremony that changed everything, when Sarah found Darius standing in her doorway. He looked different without the armor of formality. Just a man in simple clothes, his long brown hair loose around his shoulders, his dark eyes carrying something that looked almost like vulnerability. "May I come in?" he asked. She nodded, stepping back to let him enter. He moved to the window, looking out over the gardens where new growth was beginning to push through winter-hard soil. His right hand rested on the window frame, the tremor visible in morning light, no longer hidden. "I have been thinking," he said quietly, not looking at her, "about bargains and what they become when the circumstances that created them change." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. "What do you mean?" "I pulled you into this game for tactical reasons. You were the perfect shield, the perfect distraction, the perfect cover for my defect. Everything between us was performance designed to keep us both alive." He turned to face her then, and the expression on his face was unlike anything she had seen from him before. Open, uncertain, real. But somewhere between the Luna ceremony and yesterday's sunrise, the performance became something else. Something I do not have words for yet. Sarah crossed to stand beside him, close enough that she could have touched him if she chose. "What are you asking, Darius?" Not as a king to his consort, not as tactical partners maintaining appearances. His right hand trembled between them, and for once he did not try to hide it. "As myself, broken and bond, deaf and somehow still standing. Will you stand with me tomorrow? And the day after that? Not because you have to, but because you choose to." The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Sarah thought about the girl she had been 3 months ago. Broken, invisible, convinced she was poison that needed to be hidden away. She thought about what she had become in the time since. Dangerous, visible, powerful in ways that had nothing to do with the magic that terrified everyone else. She thought about the man standing before her, this war king who had saved her not out of pity but necessity, who had trusted her with truths that could destroy him, who had stood beside her while the kingdom decided whether to fall or rise. And she realized the answer had been written in every moment they had shared since he slammed his hands on that table and changed both their lives forever. She reached for his right hand, the one that trembled with the secret they both carried now, laced her fingers through his with deliberate certainty. Smiled with something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Act like you're with me," she said softly, turning his words back to him, but this time there was no performance in her voice. No tactical calculation, just truth laid bare. "Because I already am." Something in Darius's expression cracked, not broke, opened. He exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for 3 years, and when his other hand came up to cup her face, it was the first touch between them that had nothing to do with politics or survival. Just two people who had found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something new from the ruins. Outside the window, morning light caught on shattered crystal fragments scattered through the gardens. Pieces of the old power structure, broken and glittering like stars brought to earth. Gardeners worked around them, planting new growth in soil that had been controlled and contained for too long. A kingdom rising from truth instead of magic, from choice instead of compulsion, from two broken people who had learned that sometimes the cracks were what let the light in. Sarah leaned into Darius's touch, feeling his trembling hand steady against her skin, and thought that perhaps being rejected by fate had been the best thing that ever happened to her, because it had freed her to choose something better, to choose this, to choose him. And in the morning light filtering through windows overlooking a kingdom being reborn, they stood together not because prophecy demanded it or magic bound them, but because they had looked at each other across a battlefield of broken bonds and shattered expectations and decided yes, this, tomorrow, and every day after, by choice.